Welcome to all my subscribers and listeners out there to the 103rd episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. Spent 24 years flying KC-135s, just like the one you see here above my head. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we interview some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from being in these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation environments? Our purpose, to show how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. And a lot of the stories that you hear on my show have never been told before. They're being told here for the very first time. Matter of fact, today's one of those days, and you're going to hear about very interesting things that went on with some spy planes. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are beautifully detailed profiles of famous airplanes printed 4, 6, and 8 feet on vinyl, like 8874 you see here above my head. At wallpilot.com, we have 158 ready to print right now profiles of famous airplanes. But if you don't see one that you want in the ready to print, folks, fill out a custom form. I think we've got 760 profiles drawn now of famous airplanes all the way from World War I to even modern jets. We also have some commercial airplanes. We haven't dabbled in that too much yet. But if you want a custom aircraft, we can do it for you. We can put your name, famous unit, even weapons loads on some of these things, all to your specifications. So go by wallpilot.com and purchase a couple of these vinyl wall stickers, because that's what keeps the show going. On today's show, I was introduced to this gentleman by a boom operator that I used to fly with. He says, "Hey, Mark, he's got a pretty interesting story I think you'd like to hear." And sure enough, it was pretty interesting. Today, we're interviewing Vic Fraser, former KC-135 Navigator, instructor actually at the schoolhouse, who later on in his career became a U-2 Dragon Lady spy plane planner. And he's going to talk to us about what that entails and some of the missions that he was involved with today on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. So grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin our show with KC-135 Navigator and U-2 Dragon Lady planner, Vic Fraser. Vic Fraser, welcome to
Hello.
the Lessons from the Cockpit show, man.
Thank you. Thank
I
you. It's great to be here.
I really appreciate you coming on, and man, you've got some unique things we're going to talk about, and they don't all fall in the tanker navigator realm, do they?
No.
So the first question I always ask everybody is, Vic, how did you get your love of aviation? How did you get the aviation bug?
It kind of came with a transition I did in college when I was in my junior year. I was at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Don't know if any of your listeners or audience knows of that place, but I was in my junior year. I was a marketing major with general business minor, and I had to take a science course. It was an oceanography course, and I loved the science and the physical earth sciences aspect of it. And at the end of December, I missed an A minus by 1 point on a 1,000 point scale. And I was aggravated because all the other studying I had been doing for marketing and general business, I felt like a lot of the instructors uh, were people that hadn't made it in business and marketing, and they were just teaching the students what they knew, which I wasn't impressed with it, and I wasn't enjoying it. So I switched to geography in my junior year, a geography major, and I had enough credits to get marketing and general business minors when I graduated um, in December of '79. And it was in December of 79, or actually in the fall of 79, I ran into an Air Force recruiter at a career day. And this staff sergeant was pretty sharp. He I wanted to be a pilot, and I told him I wanted to be a pilot, but he saw these things on my face and went, "Oh, you've got to have 20/20 uncorrected vision to be a
Yeah.
pilot, so you can't be one. But you could be a navigator." And I was like, "No, I want to be a pilot. If I'm going to be in the Air Force and I want to fly, I want to be the pilot." Um, Long story short, it was a practice interview after I had done an interview with Whirlpool Corporation and a drugstore retail chain called Osco Jewel Drugs that um, he roped me into a practice interview to improve my interviewing skills. And it was there that I learned with my geography degree and my remote sensing course in geography, my weather meteorology courses, um, a lot of things that apply to Air Force missions and aviation uh, were in that geography degree. And he said, "You'd be a natural as a navigator, or we could send you to the University of Michigan for a master's degree, and you could become a meteorologist in the Air Force, or we could make you an intelligence officer." Um, Ultimately, after I interviewed with him and kind of sorted things out, I realized that the cockpit was really where I wanted to be, but those other two options, meteorology or intel school, maybe if I washed out of nav school, would be something I could do as a fallback. But I aimed high, to quote the Air Force saying, and I was successful after 1 year at Mather. Had my navigation degree, advanced navigation degree, and got my number one choice of plane and location, a tanker to Mather in Sacramento, California.
Oh, yeah. What a great location. You know,
Yes,
everybody that
yes,
was at Mather loved it, you know?
yes, yeah. Jock nights at the O Club,
Oh, man.
Friday nights. Oh yeah,
Boy, there's a term I haven't heard in a long time.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. Yeah, those were quite famous. Quite
yes,
famous. Almost as famous as the Top Gun bar, that you see in the movie.
yes,
The O
yeah.
clubs at Oceana and Miramar.
Right,
Oh,
right.
and Vic, I knew people would fly into Mather just to go to one of those.
Oh yeah, a lot of ace pilots from other bases would
Yeah.
fly in from March or Beale or yeah, a lot of other bases would fly there just to spend a weekend and zip back home in time for
Oh,
whatever they had going Monday.
yeah. Yeah. The ACE program was a license to steal, man.
Yeah.
It really was. We had T-37s at Pease. That was my first base. It was Pease, you know.
Nice base.
Oh, it was a beautiful base, but you know what, Vic? I had no idea how beautiful it was, okay? Because I grew up in Southern California, Vic, and everybody told me you have to put you can't put all California bases on your dream sheet, okay? Because I had like, March and Beale, and at that time Travis, okay, had
Right,
135s, okay?
right.
And I just basically went up the coast and said, okay, where are all the tankers, on the West Coast? Because I'd grown up there and lived there. And one guy says, no, you got to put an East Coast base on here. And I said, okay, what's on the East Coast near a beach? Oh, this place in Portsmouth, Pease, is on there. And that's literally where I ended up. And man, I am so glad I did. I'm not a lobster guy. Okay. My wife is, and she and I met there in Boston. But yeah, you and I got our first base of assignment, absolutely jewels of Strategic Air Command.
Yeah, the only downside on that was there was a change in the tanker mission at Mather, and there was a select cadre of people that got selected for it. I was not one of them. I upgraded to instructor actually relatively early,
Mhm.
and MPC called me up and said, though, you've been on at Mather 3 years. You're going to be 3.5 years this fall. Where would you like to go next? I said, I'd rather just stay here. And they said, well, that's not really an option. You're coming up past 3 years on station. We need to move you around. And so I got sent to, well, I initially chose Grand Forks, but MPC told me they needed um, instructor navs at Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma. And I didn't at first. At first, I wanted to get that northern tier out of the way,
Yeah.
but a wise chief master sergeant named John Sandrini suggested I not pay attention to that northern tier stuff
Yeah.
and go where they said I was needed. So I ended up at Altus for 4 years.
And you know what, Vic? I have the same story because, as you know, Pease was like one of the very first bases on the BRAC list. Okay.
Yes.
And so all the MPC flesh peddlers, coming up there and they're okay. You've had your good assignment. You've been here for 5 years. You got to go northern tier. If you want to become a general and if you want to do this, that, and the crazy thing was, we had a nav. God, what was his name? Redheaded guy. He was a tremendous skeet shooter. Okay, and actually skeet was a skeet shooter for the Air Force. And as the colonel from MPC is talking to all of us about, I don't know, 2 minutes into his briefing, this guy stands up and he goes, "This is all BS. If you guys want the real story, come see me. I'll be in training flight." Okay. But everything they're telling you right now is not correct. Okay. So, I'm just a young captain at the time, newly married. And so obviously nobody listened to that colonel's brief after that point, because this guy had come from MPC. He'd literally come to Pease and only been there maybe 6 months, 8 months from the very tanker planning shop that was standing in front of us talking. And
Wow.
so I went right over to his office and I said, "Look, they've told me I got to go to Grand Forks, Minot, all these, Wordsmith, all these things. Okay. My wife and I want to go to Kadena and stay there for a long time." He says, "Let me help you draw this up." Okay. And then he told me, he says, "What you need to do is come in some night and call the squadron commander at Kadena and make a by name request between you and Sid Du Bois." All right. He says, "That'll pretty much guarantee it." They won't be able to tell you no, because it's a squadron commander to squadron commander thing. And that's almost untouchable. Okay. In very rare cases will they change that. And so sure enough, Vic, I went in, called Bob Vincent, who is the 909 squadron commander. And I said, "Hey, look, they're telling me you're manned at 120% for pilots." He goes, "No, I've got 6 leaving this summer." And I said, "I want to be one of the replacements." He goes, "Hallelujah." I said, "Colonel Vincent, I want to come there for a very long time. I want to stay there well past my 3 years. Okay. I want to stay there for 5 years. Because as you know, Kadena is such an incredible place, you know?
Yes.
And sure enough, man, I got Kadena, you
I
know?
was only there TDY, but I spent some time at Kadena.
Oh, it's just a wonderful place to fly. And everything was so different because we didn't have the strategic mission. It was all conventional, you know,
Right.
and
Right.
and just loved it. So, but you got to Altus, and obviously, we're teaching new students down there for a long time.
Well, yeah, that it's kind of funny. My career, because I was a first lieutenant there and a
Uh-huh.
brand new instructor with 8 hours when I arrived, a lot of the people, a lot of the people didn't appreciate that I was an instructor. They didn't understand that at first, and then when it sunk in, it had some funny effects. I've got to share a funny alert story.
Oh, please do. These are always great.
My my second tour in the alert facility, which was the same as every alert facility in
Yeah.
SAC, same floor diagram. It was the same at one as at Mather. Um, I was in there on my second tour, and the first tour, people had tried to mess with me, told me to go file my finance voucher for my alert pay, and I'm like, yeah, right. I'd heard it all before at Mather. But this one guy comes to me and he says, "Hey, Vic, you're the junior nav on, or no, was I senior nav? I don't remember what it was. They said something about me being this nav on alert. I don't know if it was junior or senior. Um, I think it was the senior one. Anyway,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. They go, you're no, I doesn't matter. Anyway, they said we need you to be the tornado watch officer. And there had been a tornado watch that all that day, and it was getting late morning and the clouds are getting dark overhead, and there was a little ripple of thunder here and there occasionally. Um, and I said, tornado watch officer, what does that entail? And they said, well, you got to go up on the roof and you watch for tornadoes. I said, how do you get on the roof? And they said, oh, you go through the flight manager's office. I go, show me. I get in there, I see this ladder, and I say, hey, can I take my lunch up there? And they're like, sure. So I'm a weather guy, man. I love weather.
Yeah.
I'm a geek. I chase tornadoes in Altus. But anyway, I get up on the roof, take my lunch up there. They handed me up a chair. I get my tray. I'm up there. I got my Pentax 35 millimeter camera, and I'm taking pictures. And I'm sitting up there. I finished my lunch. I put my tray down. I'm just loving the weather. And there's this rotating cloud with some vortices, but
Oh
nothing, no
no.
funnels or anything. But it's got some rotation, and it's a gradual turning cloud just east of the base, and it's going south. It was kind of weird. It was February, and so um, all of a sudden the sirens go off, and this lieutenant colonel, senior ranking officer on alert, he starts yelling up the hatch, Frazier, get down from there. There's a tornado. And I said, no, sir, there's not. There's a rotating cloud, but no tornado formation yet. You can call the weather office and tell them that. And I'm shouting down the hole at
Yeah.
him from the roof. And he's like, he's just popping blood vessels. And he's like, no, get off that roof now. I'm like, well, okay, here's my tray. Here's my chair. Oh, and here's my camera. Just a second.
Yeah.
Okay, you take the camera. And I sauntered off the roof, came down the ladder, shut the hatch, but there was no tornado. Anyway, he thought I was an idiot, but it was perfectly safe. I used to go up on my roof at my home in Altus and watch for him too.
Oh, and they could be monster tornadoes, man. You know?
Never really saw one except a low funnel cloud. I tried to see one, never got to see one. The one time one came through Altus, and this will tie into how I moved to Alconbury.
Yeah.
I was working in command post. I'd been there for almost a year. And the day started out, it was May 6th of 1987.
Uh-huh.
And the day started out with a bad weather briefing from the weather office saying that there was a big, huge mesoscale convective complex that might be forming up over the entire panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma with wicked tornadoes and bad stuff all around, possible hail. Anyway, I'm in there and it's a windowless room.
Yeah.
And so the wing commander called me up and said, hey, Vic, if there's a tornado, be sure to give me a ring and just tell me to, get under my desk. Ha ha ha. And I said, okay, sure, Colonel. Well, later that day, we're telling aircraft not to get near our base. There's funnel clouds around, and eventually Tower shouted out that they were evacuating the tower because of a tornado in sight to the south west moving northeast. And I'm like, oh, that means it's coming right toward us. So I rang up the wing commander, told him he probably should hide under his desk. Tower is evacuating. And yeah, it was a very rough day, lots of stress. Hailstone, there was a
Oh,
picture. I still have it in a scrapbook. It's a picture of a ruler and a hailstone and a Pepsi can. And the hailstone is bigger than the Pepsi can on its side.
oh man.
Yeah. Oh, it dented up. It
A
busted up
lot
my
of
roof.
airplanes.
I had to get a new roof. I had to get a new roof on my house. Um, yeah, it was horrible. My Weber grill had a big dent in it. It was a small little
Oh,
kettle Weber, but that lid
yeah.
was pretty solid. It looked like somebody punched it.
Oh,
Yeah,
jeez.
wicked weather there. But I got so tired. I thought I was going to be in the command post another year or more. They wanted to make me. Well, I was already training combat crew procedures, CCP.
Yeah.
The PSYOP mission,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I had been doing that for quite a while too. And it's just I felt like I was in a rut and I was stuck in a place that I didn't want to be. I'd rather be flying, and I only got 66 hours of flying time that one year. It was
Oh,
horrible.
yikes.
So MPC asked if I wanted to go to because of my ESI PSYOP clearance, top secret
Yeah.
clearance. They said you're kind of shoe in for a special compartmentalized information facility, a SCIF assignment, working with the TR-1, also known as the U-2.
Yeah.
In England, they called it the TR-1, but it was a U-2. Um, working with U-2 and the astronauts, the single seat aircraft that flew at very high altitude, 60,000 feet plus, as a mission planner for the U-2. And I got home from a mid shift one morning, and I got a call from the DOC, my supervisor, saying, "Hey, MPC called asking about you. I gave them your home number. They're going to be calling you soon. What are you going to say?" I said, "Well, I'll talk to them and see what they're offering." And I don't know. He goes, "Well, you can't leave me." And I'm like, "Well, I've already been on station 4 years by this fall, and they usually do 6 months out. I
Yeah.
thought 4 years is more than enough time at Alta, so I got to go see. I got to get out of here. And so, yeah, I looked over at my wife and said, "Hey, how'd you like to go overseas in a foreign country where they speak English?" And she said, "Sounds good to me." So we did it. I ended up at RAF Alconbury in Cambridgeshire, near Cambridge, UK.
A beautiful place.
For
Another great place, man.
Yeah, yeah, and I got over there and learned mission planning for the U-2, which is way different than the 135 or any other aircraft out there.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned something too. I want to go back just real quick. There's several versions of the U2, and you mentioned TR1 and U2.
Yeah,
Uh, if you can explain some of the different configurations of the U2, like the senior spur, of course it's got the ASAR's nose and the pods on the wings. If you can talk about that for just a little bit about, what's in those things, what do they do, you know.
yeah. I'm not. It's been a long time since
Yeah.
that classification and that releasing material, but
Hmm.
I guess I can say that the most of the all of the TR-1s had ASARs,
Yeah.
as advanced synthetic aperture radar,
Big long
and
nose.
yeah, and a lot of the U-2s in California, maybe they all had them. I'm not specific. There
Yeah.
were some that were old school photography
Yeah.
um, U-2s, but a lot of the U-2s that were flying then, and a lot of them were built in the 70s. A lot of people think the U-2 is a old 1950s, 60s model. They rebuilt a whole new fleet of them in the 70s. So most of the ones flying back when I was there, and I think a lot of them are still flying,
Yeah.
were
Still
built in the
are. Yeah.
70s,
Still
and
are.
they were sprayed with a dark paint. I
Mhm.
think the paint later on had compositing in it to reduce radar signature further. Um, but the senior span, I think, was what you were referring to.
Yeah.
I think I can safely say that most of the U-2s and the TR-1s, they talk down to data sites that are in line of sight.
Yeah.
The senior span doesn't talk down, it talks up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And see, Vic, the reason I asked that question is because I got involved with the U2 TR1 missions that were going up to Baghdad right before the shock and awe campaign.
oh
And
yes.
I learned, of course, we had the senior span there, okay? And you see it take off and you go, what on earth is that great big freaking antenna on top of it?
Yeah, yeah,
And that's what they told me. It's the data link antenna so they can send everything wherever they need
right,
to. And I says,
right.
well, what do they do with the other ones? They go, oh, they're hooked to this thing called the mobster, you know. And I went, mobster? And he goes, yeah, it's kind of like a ground station that they send all this stuff back and forth to, and they talk to it and all this kind of stuff, which I thought was very fascinating. I didn't know that certain versions were tethered to a ground station, and then of course this one was not.
Right. Most of them, well, here's the thing too. When I was in Alconbury, we the mission at Alconbury in the late 80s through 89 into 90 was to observe the East German border. And so the U-2s flew along the East German border,
Yeah,
observing what the Russians and East German
yeah,
troops were doing. monitoring exercises, both ours and theirs,
Mhm.
checking force levels. Anyway, there was a downlink site in Germany called Metro Tango. And so the U-2 would take off out of Alconbury. And have you ever, on your show, have you ever had somebody talk about the mobile and that when the U-2 gets going a certain speed, the wings get
You're,
lift and
you know
the
what?
pogos flip off?
You're the first U2 person I've that had involvement with the U2 that I've talked to so far.
Wow.
I'm trying to get a couple more, but oh yeah, it's fascinating watching these things take off and land. I mean, just
Yeah, that
really fascinating.
I'll just share one morning, one of my first mornings there, they're orienting me to operations with the U2, and I got to go out in the chase vehicle, which was a souped up Mustang with a light bar on top. And the U2 taxis out. It's got the pogos under it to keep the wings level because it's a bicycle, tandem bicycle gear aircraft, and so the wings will want to drop one side or the other and drag on the ground when it's not moving very fast. Um, so to take off, it just puts in the power and it starts going down the runway, and the chase vehicle chases it. And as the wings get lift, the weight comes off the pogos. They kind of hang or latch in a little bit, and they get pulled with it for a little bit, but they eventually drop off. And when they drop off, they tend to bounce and tumble on the runway.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're going probably at 100 miles an hour when they come off, or maybe 75, 80 miles an hour when they come off. But when they come off, they're still moving and bouncing and roaming around the field. Well, I'm in the passenger seat of this car, and I see this object coming toward the windshield, and I'm like, whoa, and I duck, and it goes right over the top of the car. And the driver, the pilot who was driving the plane, because they take turns either flying the plane or doing mobile duties, either for recovery or takeoff. He said, man, I've never had one come that close before. And I'm like, lucky me. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the
quite,
launch and recovery is incredible to watch, and
yeah.
like you say, and the thing that amazed me, Vic, was the airplane's off the ground fairly quickly. It does not have a long runway.
No,
um it's not on the runway for very long. Okay.
they've launched them off aircraft carriers.
I
I
know
don't
they
know if
have.
you knew
I
that.
did.
Yes.
I did.
Okay.
A matter of
Yeah.
fact, I've seen the video, Vic, of them landing on the carrier and taking off of the carrier too, and
Uh,
I I did a TikTok post actually on TikTok and on my YouTube channel of the crew chiefs running around putting them in. Okay. After it
I,
landed, it's the craziest thing to see.
I did not know one had ever landed on an aircraft carrier. The plane is called the Dragon Lady by the pilots because it's got a full yoke
Yeah.
steering wheel. It's not a joystick like most fighter pilots, although it's a fighter pilot cockpit. That thing is
Yeah.
small, and you could have a stick next to you or between your legs, but um, it's got a full yoke and with big ailerons on the plane because that those big wings and that big glider, um, which helps it get way high in thin air. Those wings can catch a puff of a thermal and
Yeah.
just all of a sudden throw the plane into a 30-degree bank when you're 12 feet off the ground. It's not a good thing. So they're turning and correcting, and it's a very hard plane to land. And when you've been in an astronaut suit for most of the day flying and you can't even scratch your nose, and you've got some loss of dexterity and feeling in your hands because of all this clothing and spacesuit on you, your
Yeah.
astronaut suit, it's a tough plane to land, and it takes a certain kind of mentality of a human being. I was going to say a man, but
Yeah.
women fly him now.
Women flying out too.
But but yeah, it's
But
a it's a
I know
mental plane.
it's a challenging airplane to fly, and I've seen several videos of them taking off out of Beale, and you can see them going almost full throttle, on the
Yep,
yoke, on a
yep.
windy day. They're really horsing that thing around, trying to keep it level and everything. But of course, they're climbing at like what
Uh,
60, 70 degrees. I mean, they're going
70
up really
degrees.
fast.
Yeah,
70
yeah,
degrees. I mean,
67 degrees.
they're going up really fast. Okay. And so
Yeah,
they're,
those wings catch the air.
oh, exactly. And you watch this thing. And I remember Vic, because I was working in the Prince Sultan kayak. Okay. and they said, okay, we've got this UN monitoring thing we're going to do with the U-2s. And I remember going out and watching it take off. Okay. And again, this is the one that's got the data link antenna on the top. All right. And it's a big antenna. So it makes the airplane look pretty good size. And I'll never forget watching it, roll down the runway. And it wasn't on the runway very long. And then all of a sudden that thing just went boop like this and went straight up. And I was really, really shocked. Okay. And what's interesting, Vic, is the U-2 planner at the KOC, his name was Randy. He was a KC-135 nav with me at Kadena, which is the other reason I really wanted to talk to you about this, because that was a job I didn't know navigators went into. And so talk to us a little bit about how you mission plan for these things. I know there's a lot of classified details that go in where they're going to, take intelligence and stuff like that. But give us an overall view of, how does a U-2 planner plan for a mission?
When I got there in October of '87 to Alconbury, and I got in the skiff, they had this big, huge mainframe computer that would take up a good portion of this room. And it had these giant silver platter discs that it stored the missions on and stored data on. And that was the mainframe that we did our mission planning on. And I learned I think typing was one of the better things my dad made me take in high school, because he said, you're going to go to college and you're going to type all your life.
Yeah.
And he nailed it. That and driver's ed, two things I still use to this day. Anyway, I was shown how to manually mission plan, and I will just say that the plane is they use destination points with the plane, and it's very automated. You can manually program in destination points, and they showed me how to, for various altitudes, what kind of radius of turn the plane would have based on weight and altitude and bank angle. And you always turned away from the borders. So if you were on a hostile border, we always turned away from East Germany / Russia when we were flying on the inner German border. When I mission planned during Desert Shield, I mission planned all those U-2 missions along the Iraq-Kuwait border.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was that little weird diamond-shaped zone that Kuwait and Saudi Arabia had as a neutral zone.
Yeah, we called it the Klingon. We called it the Klingon neutral zone.
Yes, yeah. Well, I planned all those missions that flew well in past the war, and I did that from August into September of '90, and I had them all. There was a new. I'll just throw in. There was a new system that replaced the German ground site that had 300 people and was a hardened facility. The Army Space Program Office, yes, there was such an organization, came up with 2 trailers worth of equipment that did everything that Metro Tango in Germany did. Metro Tango is the downlink site. And they were experimental. And I was getting ready to leave Alconbury to go back to California, to go to Castle Air Force Base, requalify in the 135. And Saddam Hussein did his thing. And there was another captain that I had trained on this asset called TRAC, the TR1 or tactical. I forget what TRAC stood for, but it was the 2-trailer downlink site, and it worked with the U-2. But they had trouble figuring out how to get their computer and their software to interface with the flight plans of the TR1 U-2. So the person that was supposed to go, he kind of got a little faint of heart when he learned he had to get shots, chem gear, chem bags, all the combat stuff he had to go to the desert with. I had 4 bags of stuff when I got on the bus on August 21st of '90. Well, he didn't want to go. And I basically was told, go, make it work. It's an experimental system. You're the most qualified person to do it besides the guy you trained, who was still pretty new. Yeah. And I said, hey, I'm going to extend my TDY or my transfer to Castle by 3 months, and I'll go do this. And hopefully this this little skirmish in the desert is over by, December or, November. And so I saluted. I said, yes, sir. I told the wing commander, I'll go make it work, because the wing commander told me that when Schwarzkopf asked for it to come in, and people said, sir, that system is still under OT&E, operational tests and evaluation. It might not work. And you know what Schwarzkopf said?
I don't care.
He said, if it doesn't work, we can put it on one of the empty planes leaving here every 3 minutes, dropping stuff off, and we'll send it back to Germany.
Yeah.
So I was told, Fraser, don't let that thing fail. And so I got paired up with a Army and military intelligence unit in Germany with a bunch of civilian contractors, all in their 50s. They looked like old men to me back then. And they were all the defense contractors. There was plural. There was multiple contractors that had this system. Loral, Northrop Grumman, you name some of the Raytheon. There was all sorts of contractors.
And all the usual suspects.
Yeah, and there was a General Frank that came around when we were in Germany and walked by every one of us. And then he got to these civilian contractors. One of them had a coffee cup in his hand. He's like, so you're going with all these young kids, huh? And he goes, yes, sir. He goes, well, I hope you are successful and you can keep them all safe. And he's like, well, I'll do my best, sir, as he's holding his coffee cup.
Yeah. I know. I remember that General Frank. He was a legend in the Army.
Yes. Yep.
A legend in the Army. Not Tommy Franks. This is a completely different Frank. He didn't have an S in his name.
Yep.
And he was legendary for helping plan that left hook.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you do with the Army intel guys? Because you mentioned that you stayed there and you were working with the Army ALO guys. Because I had never, ever heard of a tanker nav being an Army liaison officer.
Well, and I was a U-2 mission planner. So, and I was working with these guys that had these awesome computers, and there was some of the trailers had a couple few people of various specialties that are important with reconnaissance and surveillance, and imagery analysts and whatnot. And I'll just say that those U-2s, when they flew along that border, even though Saddam Hussein had 5,000 tanks and a lot of them were burned in the sand under the sand, they weren't hiding from the ASARs at all. We knew where every one of those tanks was.
And you know what, Vic? I have seen that kind of a picture. Okay, and it's freaking incredible. All right.
Yeah, yeah. I got to see it live by going in that trailer. I would go in after they launched the U-2.
Oh, so you got to see the running video of it then, huh?
I got to go into the trailers and say, how's the mission working? Have you established connectivity with the U-2 on station? Because I knew what time they were going to be on station because I planned them. I knew what time they took off. And so I would go check in. And if there were problems, I might be able to, and I did, help them troubleshoot the when you fly a U-2, I will say that there's the flight plan and then there's the intelligence plan, and those two have got to interface. And if the parameters of the plane, the attitude and altitude and everything about the plane isn't quite right, the intelligence plan won't work right. And so I had to make sure that those things were working and syncing up right. And there was a few hiccups on the first few missions, but after about the first 10 days or so, things are running smoothly. I will also say that when I got there, I had my own parking spot in Riyadh. We were put in Riyadh, and they put those true trailers in a compound at the USAMIDM, the U.S. military to Saudi Arabia. And we were underneath these pillars and underneath these where they had parked cars that the people, the civilians in the USAMIDM, they were all sent home, by the way. So they put the two trailers under the USAMIDM, put barbed wire around them. We were a skiff also, that compound. And we had security forces or MPs. There was a cadre of MPs that guarded those assets or that asset 24/7, 365. And they deployed with the intelligence unit. And I got to meet every one of the officers in that security detail. One of them was a female lieutenant. She was badass. Anyway, we had a great working relationship. But the trouble with staying with the Army in a parking ramp in the heat of Saudi Arabia in August and September was I was suffering
Terrible.
from a lack of sleep and
Yeah.
dust and the heat. And then the 101st Airborne came in and disturbed my sleep one night. I almost got into scrap with a young private who was probably 6'2" and had a boombox on his shoulder. And I was telling him to shut it off. And he wanted to argue with me, and he didn't know I was an officer. We were all, by the way, just on cots together. And I had my own parking space. And when I lost my parking space and I had two more people in my parking space next to me snoring, I said, I can't live like this.
Yeah.
And so I bailed on the unit, and they all understood. They said, hey, we understand. We'd do it if we could.
Oh
But you're in
yeah.
the Air Force, so you go get your hotel room,
Yeah.
which I was in a floor between two. I was on the floor in a hotel room between two queen size beds on the green shag carpeting. But after one of the officers got shipped off, I had his bed. Anyway,
Um, we had that famous, God, what was the name of the hotel? The Al Yamama.
Al Yamama down in Riyadh. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I, I I don't know if you flew any of the Elf One missions, but
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
80, 82 and 83.
did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, during that time frame when you were flying these missions, man, there was a lot going on in the Iran-Iraq war. And
Yes.
so the
Yeah.
AWACS was watching a lot of stuff go on. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
See,
Reagan had us keeping an eye on that.
yeah. And see, when did I get there? I did it 86. I was there in 86. It was right after the USS Stark got hit by the Exocet missiles. Okay.
Oh
So,
wow.
so things, Vic, were
Yep.
really ramped up, really
Yep.
ramped up. Okay. And, those were fun missions. Railroad, that was the name of the track, Railroad. And we kept that for Desert Storm because
Mm-hmm.
it was in such a strategic place. We kept that air refueling area, railroad. But, I
Yeah.
remember taking off out of Riyadh, just hotter than snot on the ramp, you know, and then we would put, two 1 liter bottles in the freezer at night filled with Gatorade powder. Remember that?
Yep.
And you could feel it go all the way down when you took off and you were climbing out. You were so hot inside. Your internal temperature was so warm that you could feel that cold water cold. I'll never forget that feeling the first time I
Yeah.
did that, Vic, and we were there in August, okay, when it's just blazingly hot.
Yep.
In A models, we're flying
Yes.
A models, okay?
Yes. I was A models in 82 and 83 there.
Oh, man.
First, both crews were out of Mather when I was there. Um, and of course, we went to ETTF, European Tanker Task Force, and then they said you can go
Yeah.
to Iceland or you can go to Saudi Arabia. And the first time, my crew took me to Saudi Arabia, and I hated it there. I
Oh,
really did. I hated it there. And then my second crew, I had a female boom operator with blonde hair. Um, Kristen was her name, and she she was such a distraction. I took her down to the souks. She could never go alone. We always had to
yeah.
go to the souks together. But all the merchants were like, "Oh, here, scarf for you. Here, take scarf for your hair. Cover your hair,"
Yeah.
because her blonde hair was so distracting for their culture.
Yeah.
And they always kept giving her scarves and trying to, get her to cover her hair. Yeah. And then go
Do
ahead.
you, do you remember her last name by chance?
Well, it was Brewer, but it's now Redmond. Redmond. You know her? I know you bet. I bet you do. You know Jean?
Gino was my squadron commander on the 909.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Kristen and Gino are fabulous friends of ours. Fabulous
Okay.
friends
I
of ours.
have not
When you said
talked to her
Kristen
in
Boom
years.
operator, I went, no, it can't be that much of a coincidence that
Oh,
we
yeah.
know
And
that.
it was her first TDY.
Oh, was it really?
Oh, and listen to this. When we landed there, the pilot, Dwayne Schreffler,
Mhm.
he had a boot knife, and they confiscated his boot knife. We had gotten the lecture about, Victoria's Secret catalogs and anything that could be
Yeah.
perceived in their culture as
Yeah.
pornography. But they took his boot knife and they said, in 3 weeks, you'll get it back. And he's like, yeah, right. Well, we're there in the Al Yamama Hotel. And I go down to the souks one night and I have I see this beautiful sword that's a curved Pakistani sword with all
Yeah.
this Arabic writing on it.
Yeah.
And I haggle for it, and I get it for 120 real. The owner of the souk was asking 180, 160, and then I he finally said, "Okay, we have tea." And we had tea together, and then finally I said, "I've got to go," and he goes, "What about sword?" And I said, "Well, 120," and he goes, "Okay."
Yeah.
And so I came back to the hotel room and I go, "Hey, Shref, are you feeling a little naked without your boot knife when you fly?" And he goes, "Yeah, why, Nav?" And I go, "Your nav will protect you." And I unsheathed the sword and I stuck it up near the ceiling in the hotel room. He's like, "Good gosh, where'd you get that?" Anyway, yeah, that was stowed on the plane when we left. And he did get his knife back.
Yeah.
But it was so funny that they took his knife from him and then his nav goes and buys a sword.
Yeah. And you know what, Vic, I loved going through the souks. Okay. On the wall here next to me, I have one of the Persian rugs that I bought on one of the TUIs there. Okay. I loved going through the gold souks were fine. I wasn't married at the time. My second trip there I was, but I loved going through the rug markets. Okay. I was fascinated by the carpets. And so I have three of them. All right. I've got one on the wall here next to me. And you talk about going to the gold souks and everything, and
Yeah.
I lost my wedding band and just went down to the gold souk. I think I paid like $86 for it. As a matter of fact, here it is. I still have it. You know,
Oh, wow.
I still have it. And you just pay by the weight.
Yep.
But I remember the facial coverings that were all gold and everything, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this. You
Yeah.
know, and what was it when we were there during this time period? I think one real was like
A
30,
third of a dollar.
yeah, a
Yeah.
third of a dollar is like 38 cents, 37 cents, something like that.
Yep.
So he got that sword for a pretty good price,
Yeah, I
you
did.
know.
Downtown by the souks was where I also got to experience Chop Chop Square, and you asked me to
Oh
mention that.
yeah, yeah. You might want to tell everybody
Yeah.
what this is, because this is fascinating because it's such a cultural difference and a cultural shock too. But go ahead and talk about the Chop Chop Square.
Chop Chop Square is where the Saudis administer their justice system on those convicted of various crimes. And it was on that second tour in Riyadh in '83 that they always pushed the Westerners up to the front of Chop Chop Square to witness up close and personal the punishment being meted out on those criminals and those people in society that had violated Sharia law. Um, I was pretty young back then still, and I didn't fully understand it all, but I witnessed two Filipinos that had been convicted by their employer in a cassette and CD record store, or maybe it was just cassettes and albums, but mostly cassettes. Anyway, they were accused of stealing cassettes from their employer. Now, these Filipino young men, um, they were even smaller than I am. I'm not a big guy, but they were so kind and gentle and friendly. I was like, why would they steal cassettes? I just didn't understand the accusation on them. I didn't believe it, to be honest. But I watched them take these young men and they took their hand in Saudi Arabia, the punishment for stealing is to have your hand chopped off. Well, I was told it's okay. We do it civilized here now. And what they did is they put their hand down on a stump, and a man came with a sword and ceremoniously put his sword to the wrist. And of course, they started bawling and crying, both of these young men, and they loaded him into an ambulance where they took him to a hospital. and surgically remove their hands
Oh,
at the
jeez.
wrist. Um, I saw that and I'm like, that's horrible. And then I saw a woman get tethered to a whipping post, and she was accused of adultery. And she was in a full abaya, head to toe. You could see her eyes, you
Yeah.
could see her feet, but the rest of her was in this black abaya. And the uh, the the man doing the whipping, the flogging, she was sentenced to take 40 lashes,
Oh,
and I could not get through it. I pushed out of there by about, well, I don't know, it was in the low 30s. She collapsed and was just slack on the post, and
yeah,
her back was red
yeah. From being whipped.
and it was wet. And
Oh,
I was so horrified, I almost got sick. And I pushed out of there, and I wanted to go fight somebody after watching that. Because I said to the man, this Saudi man next to me, I go, he said, she's accused of adultery. She's guilty. And I said, what about the man? What about the man that she had adultery with? No, it's her fault. I was horrified. Um, a lot of our viewers are probably going to be a little shocked by this, but it is Sharia law.
it is.
And I don't know if it's changed in Saudi Arabia, but it's still that way. I know it's that way in Afghanistan now.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
We had two guys that went down there uh where they beheaded two people, and we had to send one of the guys home because it they tell you don't go down, don't go down, don't go down, don't go down, you know,
yeah,
and one was a murderer, one was a rapist. Okay. And these guys thought, oh, we're tough, we can take it. And of course, like you said, they push them right to the front. And um, they both watched both executions. And one of the guys, as a young crew chief, had to go home because he was just shocked by it and couldn't function.
yeah.
And the other kid, they're like going, look, we told you not to do this, you know. But yeah, like you said, man, it's a different culture over there, and they do things very differently. And they do things very differently in that culture. Okay. Now, when I went back in 2003, we were down at PSAB, so we didn't get up to Riyadh at all. And a matter of fact, we weren't allowed to go up there unless you had official business. You know, the carpet souks and gold souks people would come to PSAB instead of us going up
Right.
there. But I was like you. The first time I went there, I was like, oh man, this place is very different. I think I remember saying very different.
In
But when I went there in 2002 and 2003, working at the CAC at Prince Sultan, we were on the base, so I didn't have a lot of interaction with the people outside, except for the Saudis that were there in the KAC. Okay, and I became really good friends with one of the Saudi 3 stars, who was the nephew of the king at the time, King.
Abdullah.
Oh yeah, King Abdullah. Okay, and he had been to the States numerous times, spoke really good English. Unfortunately, his colonel aide didn't speak a lick of English. And I remember sitting down to lunch with him, and talking to him. I asked him, how did you meet your wife? And I'm going to never forget this. The first words out of his mouth, he'd kind of lean back in his chair and he goes, Mark, dating is so overrated, but I love the food, Vic. I really, really enjoyed the food. Okay. Lamb shawarmas was one of my favorite, and is even to this day. You can't find it here, in the States. The closest, believe it or not, Vic, to a authentic Saudi chicken or lamb shawarma, I had one down at Disney World at the Morocco place, and it was
Okay. Yeah.
dang close. Okay.
They did good in Turkey too.
They really did. And there's a lot of Turkish stuff that I loved, obviously you flew a couple deployments out of Incirlik. Incirlik was fabulous. We brought
Yeah.
home
Yeah.
38 shotguns. We had 38 shotguns in the back of the plane once. Okay.
Wow. Wow.
Because the shotguns there are beautiful, hand carved, and are just absolute beautiful pieces of artwork. And I've still got mine that I bought, and it's great. I didn't know that they made the Winchesters, the barrels for Winchester of Europe. They're made there in
I
Turkey.
didn't know any of this, but
I didn't know
wow.
it. I didn't know it either. Okay, because I bought a Winchester over under, and they said no. Hulu, the company, the Turkish company Hulu, that makes the Turkish shotguns, makes the barrels for Winchester of Europe. So yeah, ATF came out to the plane and says, okay, how many shotguns did you guys bring home? And I said, sir, there's like 38 back there, and he just said, okay, the deal. We confiscate them, and when the paperwork comes through, you'll get a little card in the mail that says come down and pick it up. And that's what happened.
Wow.
And
Good deal,
oh
man.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, they've got the same thing at Incirlik. They've got the gold suits, they got the carpet suits.
Oh yeah. I like turkey a lot better. I'll just
Oh,
say
I
that.
did too. I
At
did.
least you could have
Absolutely.
a glass of wine or a beer at the end of the day,
Yeah,
unlike Saudi Arabia.
yeah, yeah. And I loved going down to it was called Mujats, where you get one of the
Yes,
Adana kebabs. Remember that place?
yes, yeah. Do
A
you remember
great.
chicken tava?
Oh yes, yes.
Chicken tava in the
I love
cast iron
chicken tava.
skillet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they bring it out to you in the cast iron stick. It was delicious. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
But you could get two Adana kebabs, two cans of
Hmm.
Fanta orange or root beer, and two pieces of flatbread. And I think you paid like $8 for it. It was ridiculous. And
Yeah.
that's where my crew and I would go debrief our Northern Watch missions. We'd go down there and talk about the things that we could, because obviously had the mass debrief afterward. But yeah, that was the one thing I loved about going to the Middle East is just tasting all the food from all the different cultures and everything. It was just fabulous,
Yes.
man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fabulous, man.
So
So
Ever the Navigator, I'm looking at it. We've been on air for about almost an hour, and I don't know how much you want to go
hour
over
and a
that, but
half.
time control is my oh, okay, hour and a half. Okay.
Uh,
Uh,
I mentioned to you before we started, explain to people what celestial navigation is from the navigator's perspective in our airplane, because every A model I ever flew had a sextant in it, and the nav would do the cell shots and everything. This is really fascinating.
well, and the Sextant transitioned into the R model too.
Yeah.
Love those new fan jet engines, those
Oh,
CMF
absolutely fabulous.
56s.
Oh
Those
my
are a game
gosh,
changer. Yeah.
they really
No more
were.
110-second water calls for the Navigator.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great modification of the plane. And I'm in Spokane. I'm at Fairchild. There's the largest gathering of KC-135 R models at Fairchild in the world again.
Yeah.
It was that way in 94 when I PCSed here from Castle, and I stood up the 97th Aerofueling Squadron here as a
Really,
flight
you were an
commander.
Astra?
Yeah, I was an Astra.
I
Yeah.
was too.
Were you at where were you?
I was at Fairchild.
Oh, at Fairchild.
I stood up the KC-135 weapons school. That was
Oh,
that
yes.
was that was my project when I went up to the DO staff. Okay, and I said I'm not going to stand this thing up and not be a part of it. Okay, and so I was the DO of the school for 4.5 years. Okay, and then I
I
left
could
the.
name drop with you. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know we probably could. Okay, Tim Smith was my squadron commander there,
Hmm.
and this is the 2000 this is 2001 time frame, and
Right.
I just loved it there, and I love
Yeah.
being in the Astros. Matter of fact, I have an Astra ball cap. I still have my Astra ball cap because I lost one of them. I don't know where I lost it, and I was so unhappy that I'd lost it. And I actually ended up there um, at the weapons school giving a speech to everybody, and I went down to the 97th. This was before they closed and opened back up again,
Right.
and got my Astra hat. And
Yeah.
because the one that I had, the 97th hat ball cap that I had flown all my post 9/11 missions with that ball cap on, and I was so sad that I lost it.
Oh,
But
wow. Yeah.
but yeah, you're an Astra like me.
Yes. Yeah, that Bob Keneally and Brian Kelly stood up the 97th. They moved from Maelstrom
Yeah,
to Fairchild. And I was offered any one of the three tanker bases when I was leaving Castle. They were closing
yeah,
Castle down. They wanted to send me to the TACC, and I was hoping for a three-letter office symbol at AMC Scott.
yeah.
And I wasn't getting picked up. I was a 2-year pinned on major. And so I just said to Rich Chavez, I believe
Rich
that was his
Chavez.
name.
Yeah, I know Rich.
Yes. Anyway, he said you can have anyone. I said, are you still offering any one of the three major tanker bases, McConnell, Grand Forks, or Fairchild, to a navigator that wants to go? And he said, yes. I said, I'll take Fairchild. He said, are you sure? Because I can't guarantee you a field grade slot. I said, there's a shortage of navs. I kind of saw the flying gate thing on the, I
Yeah,
mean, lieutenant colonels were getting pulled in. So I'm like,
yeah,
I loved flying. I really did. I
yeah.
loved being a navigator. Anyway, I said, no, I'll take Fairchild. And so, yeah, I came up here and I was a flight commander in the 97th when they stood up.
I
Anyway,
know Bob
celestial
Keneally.
navigation.
I know
Okay,
Bob
yeah,
Keneally
good.
too. Bob
Yeah.
Keneally was a captain in the 509th at Pease when I showed up. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So I know Bob. As a matter of fact, I'm still in touch with Bob Keneally. Okay. What was the other name you mentioned?
Brian Kelly.
I don't know Brian Kelly, but I do know Bob. Matter of fact, Bob is still there at the
Yes.
Fairchild Spokane area.
Yeah, he
Anyway,
is.
celestial navigation, because this is, I mean, you have to remember, my listeners have to remember, this is how people navigated for centuries.
Yes.
And we were still using it in the KC-135.
Yeah, I will just say that the sextant, a lot of people they still picture the Columbus type sextant with the triangle and the arc, and you have the pendulum and you hold it steady on the ship, and you can get the azimuth and the degree of angle above the horizon. Well, the sextant on the plane is a sophisticated piece of equipment, kind of like a level though. It has a water chamber and some crosshairs, and you basically keep the sextant level and you keep the bubble in the middle of the crosshairs, and you look at the body, whether it's the star, the moon, or the sun. Of course, if you're going to look at the sun, you got to put in about 8 filters so you don't burn your eye out.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but it was cool. I could look at the sun and see sunspots on it too when doing an
Really?
observation on the sun. There were little black dots on it I noticed way early in my career, and I asked my instructor at Castle about that, and he said those are sunspots, and I was like, really? So yeah, I could tell you about sunspot activity that certain years I noticed there were a lot more than others. Anyway, I'm a geek that way too. I
Yeah,
still get
that's a weather
space
thing,
weather,
man. That's a weather
space
thing.
weather. Yep, yep. Anyway, but we basically would get a body in the sky in our sextant. We would find it, whether it was the North Star, that's a cool star. Any Boy Scout will know that if they're at night in a clear night out in the wilderness, they can find north just by finding the Big Dipper and then following it to the tail end of the Little Dipper. That end of that handle is the North Star. And that's always true north. It's within a degree of true north at all times a year, as long as you're in the northern hemisphere. If you go down south on the down near the equator, the North Star gets too low on the rise and you'll lose it, or it'll go behind the curvature of the planet. But it's yeah, that's one way to get a line of position, and then you can get the moon or some other stars. And the ideal is to have three different 45 degree angles to get you a three-way, a cross,
Yeah.
multiple cross. And then if you get they all line up and hit an X, that's where you are. If you get a triangle, you could be on any one of those points in the triangle, or maybe a little bit in between. But we always used to DR, dead reckon, as we flew, and then we would get a celestial fix off the bodies of stars, sun, moon, and they'd give you lines of position, and you'd be somewhere on those lines. And if they intersected, that increased your most probable position.
And
Anyway,
and of course there's the math that's involved with it and everything like that. But
uh,
I remember at Pease, man, every flight we did some type of celestial nav leg, unless of course, it was at Pease Air Force Base, the FB-111 air refueling area was only 30 minutes away, 32 minutes to be exact. Okay. From takeoff to entering
IP.
to the IP. Okay. So, but what we would do, of course, we'd leave there and normally we'll go west or southwest and fly these celestial nav legs. And I remember they would do, I think it's like 3 shots during that time period, and we as pilots, no hands on the throttles, maintain speed, altitude, attitude, all those kinds of things, so we didn't spoil the shot and everything. And it was a thing to behold for me, simply because we'd be, 2 miles off or something like that from the actual ground track that the INS was showing. Of course, when we got Pacer Crag, all of that was different. I mean, we were we were within a half mile every time. But I just remember flying nav legs, man. The navigator be back there, looking through the sextant, doing his math on the table, and going, this is where we're at. We need to come this way. We need to make it. You're heading, 2 degrees to the left or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was a thing of beauty. And of course, we did that because of some of our missions were way up on the poles, and they would go into, what was it, grid? Going to
Yes,
grid,
grid.
yeah.
Did you ever do an Alpha Long out of Fairbanks, out of Eielson Air Force
No,
Base?
I never did. I never did one of those.
Oh, I got two wonderful tours to Eielson in January 2nd, 3rd through about March 6th in
Oh,
84 and 85. And it was
oh,
cold, it was dark, but the Northern Lights,
were
um,
incredible.
yeah. Yeah, but the Alpha Longs would go so far north, they'd go past the pole and you'd start coming down toward the Soviet Union, um, refueling a RC 135 that was
Oh
going
yeah,
somewhere. Yeah.
yeah. Or the
And
Cobra
we'd go into
Ball.
grid.
Yeah.
Yep. We'd go into grid. And I remember one time I couldn't get shots because the Aurora Borealis were so bright that the boom couldn't find the star. He said, there's too much interference with all these auroras. So we still had the windows on each side of the sextant port
Yeah.
too. So I just sat there. I was like, well, I guess we can't get a shot right now. The INS and DNS are pretty close. We're good for another 20 minutes. Let's enjoy the show. And
Yeah.
it was amazing. Um, St. Elmo's Fire. Did you get much experience with that?
I did at Kadena, Vic, because we'd have those monster thunderstorms at four
Yep.
o'clock in the afternoon, or worse, we'd have to typhoon evac. Okay.
Right.
And so I've been hit by lightning 3 times. And,
Oh,
and
your
as you
plane.
know,
Your
yeah,
plane.
the plane, yeah, the plane's
Yeah,
been hit
not
by
you.
lightning three. Yeah. But it's about to happen, as you know, Vic, because the whole windshield is just
Yep.
crackling in
Yep.
front of you. It's just crackling in front of you. Okay. And you know what? My co-pilot once reached up and put his finger in it, and it literally knocked him back into his chair. All right.
This is what you should touch the windscreen with. The rubber tip and the pencil does not conduct. But boy, that St. Elmo's, I saw a guy go like this around the windscreen, and it was balling up like a
Yeah, it's
spider
following
web
the pencil. Yeah.
around the end of the pencil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when my co-pilot did that, of course, it put a big dot, and with all the electricity emanating from where he stuck his finger. Okay. And he stuck his finger, and it literally shocked him back into his chair, you know. And you know, I didn't. I said, I don't know if you should do that, Co. He just reached up and went like this, and bang.
Should have
You know,
kept your gloves on.
yeah, I should have kept the gloves on. I know, but that those two phenomenon, those two weather phenomenon, were just incredible when you saw them. And I
Yeah.
was like you, Vic. We were flying from Kadena up to Eielson for it was that at that time it was called Cope Thunder. It's called Red Flag Alaska now. And we were flying up. We took off about 3:30 in the afternoon out of Kadena. And of course, Tokyo is like, 3 hours away, 2.5 hours away. And so it was civil twilight. The sun was just down below the horizon, but you could see all the lights of Tokyo underneath you. We're like going, oh my gosh. And I told people, I said, look, if you got your cameras with you, come up now, because you're not going to see this. Well, as we went further up toward Kamchatka, the Aurora Borealis came out for like 2 hours, Vic. And we're all
Mm-hmm.
sitting there in the cockpit going, I have no idea where the plane was going during that time period. I don't know what the fuel panel was doing, because we're all just going, oh my gosh. And just looking outside and watching those waves of green and all these different
Yeah.
things, and for 2 hours, and it lit up the cockpit, Vic.
Oh yeah.
It
Why
lit
we
up the
love being
cockpit.
aviators.
Yeah. And And you know what, Vic? I tell everybody about this one flight, okay, when we were deploying up to Alaska, because you see the lights of Tokyo at civil twilight, you know, and it's just these little bare fingers of the sun showing up behind. The aurora borealis came out. By the time we got to the Aleutian chain, the sun was coming up the other direction. Okay.
Mhm.
But as you know, Vic, there's like 150 mile an hour tailwind when you're doing this, 120, 150 mile an
Yep.
hour once you get past Japan. Okay. And we were smoking across the ground, Vic, smoking.
Yep.
I think we had like a 614 ground speed or something crazy. We weren't dragging fighters with us, you know, but we were just smoking across the ground. And by the time we got to Anchorage, Vic, we realized we're too heavy to land. Where am I going to dump gas? Okay.
Wow.
And so I thought to myself, and we're coming up, as you know, you come up to Eielson, the Mount McKinley is like right over here. And I said, Anchorage Center, Kobe 5-4 request. Go, yeah, go ahead, Kobe. What do you want? I said, Kobe 5-4 would like present position direct to Mount McKinley. We're too heavy to land. I need to go and hold somewhere. Can I hold around the mountain and just kind of watch the mountain for a while until we get down to our landing weight? And he says, Kobe 5-4, you're cleared, you know, VFR direct Mount McKinley and call us when you're ready. And so we made about 4 or 5 laps around McKinley with our gear down, trying to get and as you know, in the R model, doesn't help much.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So finally we turned and I dumped about 20,000 pounds. But we were at 25,000 feet. And as you know, Vic, that's a 28,000 foot mountain. And so we're
Yeah.
looking up 3,000 feet at 25,000 feet at the mountain. And then when we
Well, and
landed at Eielson, we're taxiing to our parking spot, and a moose cow and her 2 calves walk right in front of us. And
wow.
I said to the crew, I says, well, you've seen just about everything you could possibly see on one flight, you know?
Northern exposure.
Yeah, exactly. Northern exposure, big time. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's like you say, Vic, you and I have seen things that you really can't describe to people what the aurora borealis looks like when your whole cockpit is that luminescent green color,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just how captivating it is just watching the waves just going back and forth like that. Wow, you and I could talk about you
Yeah.
know
I was
pictures.
I was going to say I found it interesting in my career that of all the areas of expertise in aviation that they got rid of the navigator before the pilot because the computations and the things that are needed to make navigation, even the INS is an amazing piece of machine, and so is the DNS. It's a very complex computer program, and gyros, gimbals, sensors that can sense motion, and not to mention GPS and all the things that now are available. But the navigation part with winds, which never make flying easy. When you were talking, anyway, it's just funny that the hardest, most complex part of flying, getting from A to Z and on time, or doing an L shape, like the mission they did into Libya back in '86, where they realized, oh, we're going to hit the turn to go south a couple minutes early, and they slowed down. But then as soon as they turned south, they realized, oh, there's this big jet stream coming up north, and now we got to put it up full throttle
Yeah.
with the fighters in tow to be able to get them there. And they still were a little bit late, from what I remember. But it's just the winds mess everything up, or can mess everything up. And anyways, it amazed me at the end of my career that I was obsolete. I was replaced by moving map displays in a cockpit where no longer would the pilot turn around and go, "Hey Nav, what's that lake down there?"
Yeah.
Because he could just look at a moving map display
Yeah.
in the plane and go, "Oh, that's Pyramid Lake. Cool." Yeah, it was just amazing to me how technology has advanced. And well, what was the name of what was the handle of the guy you had in here that was the drone, the
Oh, Tide.
Tide?
Yeah,
Yes,
Tide.
I watched that one with you, and that is fascinating. What a cool career he has.
Well, and again, it gets back to the communication piece of that is just crazy. And when we had navs in the cockpit, you ran the radios, you ran the mission. You really did. The navigators ran the
Yep.
missions, you know.
Yep.
And I'll be honest with you, man. After Desert Storm, they said, don't ever, 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 ever take the navigator out of the KC-135 cockpit
Yep.
because he or she is another aviator. And what did we do? Oh, we've got this ring laser gyro thing going on now with GPS. We don't need them anymore. And I went, don't know about that. Okay.
Well, it's also just that additional situational awareness that
Absolutely. Absolutely,
sometimes as
Vic.
pilots, you both can be locked in on fuel panels, instruments, other things going on, and you can tend to lose SA, and
Absolutely,
that's
Vic.
that's tough.
Absolutely, Vic. What were you doing in Libya? Were you part
I
of
didn't
the
go.
Eldorado?
No, no. I just was uh, discussing. Um, oh, good, didn't go. Um,
Yeah.
I was just talking about the Libya mission and how
Yeah.
it was challenged by winds from the south
Yeah.
when they planned them from the west.
Yeah.
And so their times going from west to east, they were way ahead, and then they didn't realize, they slowed down unnecessarily because then as soon as they turned south, it was challenging. Um, they made it, but it was one of those things where could have been even worse without a navigator on board. I'll just say it that way.
Um, a very good friend of mine, Vic from BYU, was the lead KC-130 KC-10 pilot. He's
Okay.
the guy who had the F-111 guy on board. Goes, uh, we're late. Okay, push it up. You know, and he tells an incredible story about that. And and what they had to do to get there on their timing.
Right. Right.
Because again, the F-111s coming out of Lakenheath were supposed to strike at the same time as the Carrier America's strike package that were supposed to, and they almost didn't make it,
Yep.
because of, again, like you said, winds coming out of the south, not out of the west. The mission
Yeah.
planning was thrown completely off. And then one of the guys that was the strike planner at Lakenheath for the F-111s is also a good friend, and he talks about that. He wrote a book about about the whole operation, and very fascinating stuff. So anyway, hey, I'm looking at my list here. We got everything. Got through everything.
All right. Um,
Vic, I really appreciate you coming on, man,
it's
and
been,
talking to me. This has been a lot of fun. Really, it
I
has.
agree.
And
I agree.
I I've really enjoyed this, and having you on as a guest on the Lessons from the Cockpit show, brother.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And I know there's going to be some people out there that see this and go, oh my gosh, they haven't seen me in ages. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear from them. I hope they'll give me a call. I'm easily found in the phone directory. I've got still
Yeah.
have a landline. I have a cell, but my landline is still good.
All right.
Um,
I'll send you Gino's contact it so you can talk to him.
okay. Yeah. I'm,
They
I'm
live down in
friends on,
Panama.
I'm friends on Facebook
Oh, yeah.
with him and Kristen also. I
Yeah.
see their posts, so I know what's
Yeah.
kind of what's going on.
Kristen
I just
posts a lot more than he does,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah.
he's doing his parrot head thing, like always. So
All right.
I see them both every year at Airlift Tanker Association. I'm on one of the committees at Airlift Tanker Association. So Gino is always there, and Kristen has been there a couple times too. So anyway,
Okay. All
thanks
right.
again, Vic.
All right, Mark. Yeah, appreciate it. It's been great.
It's been great to have you on, brother. Folks, this is why I do this show. Hearing these stories, particularly about the Dragon Lady, because everybody's always into the spy planes, particularly one that's been around for so long. And I really appreciate Vic sharing with us his stories and his lessons learned on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. This episode is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home office or hangar. We have 158 ready to print famous airplanes from Focke-Wulf 190s all the way up to F-35s, but we can also do custom for you. If there's an airplane that's not in the ready to print that you really want with your name on it from a particular unit, even with a particular weapons load, we can do it for you. We've got 760 line profiles drawn now. So go to wallpilot.com and order one or two of these great prints. This is 8874, my KC-135 when I was stationed at Kadena. You see here behind me. And believe me, folks, these are really detailed and very well researched. By detailed, I mean you can read the stenciling on the Sidewinder missiles, and the arming T-handles are all on there. We do exhaustive research and exhaustive drawing when we do this. 4, 6, and 8 feet. We did a 30-footer for a guy, so we can go bigger if there's something you really want across an entire wall. Go to wallpilot.com and order a couple of these great prints. Folks, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I often put other videos up here, and I do a lot of shorts. We're doing really good on our YouTube channel. We're 218,000 subscribers, and we just went over 167 million views in 13, 14 months. So things are doing well there. If you want to support the show, please become a member of my All Ranks Club on Patreon. The link is below. Those that are joining at the designated driver and the by the bar will have personal time with me via Zoom meeting. I do question and answer periods. Done them before. Some of them have gone as long as 3 hours. And also doing a virtual bar night where we just kind of all gather around together and talk aviation. So please become a member of my Patreon All Ranks Club. If you just want to support the show and contribute to it, my Venmo is below. And folks, everything that we collect goes to supporting the show, whether it be internet service or podcast hosting. That's where it all goes. And also Adobe that helps me edit all of this. So please support the show. And I appreciate those of you that have already done that and have become members of the Patreon Club, All Ranks Club. Next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show, I'm interviewing one of my college buddies that I've known for over 40 years now, who flew KC-10s, was the lead KC-10 pilot, Operation El Dorado Canyon with F-111s around him. Has some very interesting stories to tell about a T-38 flight that didn't quite go the way it was supposed to. And then he's going to talk to us about the airlines where he flew for Delta for quite a while. And what does this pilot shortage really entail and some possible solutions to it? So join us next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I appreciate all of you coming by, downloading, subscribing, and it really means a lot to me. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week, episode 104 on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.